Chinese diaspora, I think we'll wind up hearing more about in the course of the day. I'm very pleased to have another of our distinguished members of the committee, Bob Fu. Dr. Pastor Bob Fu is another Chinese student activist who has made his way to our country, become a citizen. He now runs China Aid and is a man who has also recently been in Taiwan. Bob, we're very pleased to have you with us.
Thank you, Frank. Just a quick point really about what Lian Chao talked about, the China's kind of penetrating impact in the Taiwan society. I mean, it's really, they're adopting a very same playbook as they have been doing, dealing with the Western free societies, that they are using their so-called sharp power, not hard or soft power, basically financial and propaganda, to take advantage of the free society, all the freedoms. We were in Taiwan just with Lian Chao, and you see the CCP's flag. I mean, the Communist Party's flag. It's not only the PRC's flag. CCP's flag was being being transported and being broadcast in a mobile, in a vehicle around the Taipei street, broadcasting the propaganda. How much, Taiwanese or Chinese who hold a flag of the Republic of China would be arrested, would be immediately thrown into prison. And one project I want to, maybe the committee, somehow we can focus on is to study how much media independence in Taiwan society right now. If you turn on TV in Taiwan, of course, we still cherish this 23 million people democracy. But if you watch on the Taiwanese the TV station or newspaper, read the newspaper editorials, how much percentage left, Mark, right? Not much, but they're extremely one-sided. When the election, like midterm election in Taiwan happened, one DPP candidate posts of her platform on Facebook, immediately, over 3 million kind of cyber kind of hits anonymously, and almost taken down her Facebook just for promoting independence or freedom of Taiwan. So that might be a worth project. We can do a research and see, the money trail that who are funding this Taiwan's media. Maybe 90% already belong to the Confucius Institute, kind of the same funding source, the propaganda department of the Communist Party. So I want to raise that issue.
Thank you for that comment and for your leadership on raising the alarm. We'll be talking about it momentarily during the course of the afternoon, what the Communist Chinese Party is doing to people of faith in China. Let me turn to our two presenters so far, Brian Kennedy and Lian Chao, to wrap up this discussion.
Actually, why should Americans care about Taiwan? I'm worried that this is the 40th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, but that many Americans, especially those who, you call the young people who grew up long after the end of the Cold War, they don't appreciate what these things really mean. Maybe you could just say something about that. Why should Americans care?
I think that's a great question. Thank you. The reason I mentioned before, we need to update TRA and Taiwan policy, U.S. Taiwan policy. The reason is that all this Taiwan policy formulated before Taiwan became a democracy, a real democracy. So in the late 70s, early 80s, even the six assurance by President Reagan, that's still before Taiwan became democracy. Taiwan right now is a beacon of democracy in Asia, and recognize universal value, recognize the American value, and be a very loyal partner of the United States. If we don't defend Taiwan, I think that will mark the decline of America as a free country, as a democracy, and the leader in the free world. I think it's critical for the United States to make sure we come to Taiwan's help, because the fundamental geopolitical situation has changed, and we no longer need China to balance the Soviet Union, and Taiwan become a democracy, and that changed everything. And if we don't support Taiwan, I think right now the only thing that stopped China to invade Taiwan is the United States. They were not sure, they are still not sure whether US will interfere or not. But in the TRA, it's one-sided, unilateral imposed obligation. It's not treaty obligation. So China will always test the water, how far United States can tolerate, what cost the United States would bear to defend Taiwan. We need to make that clear. Otherwise, a new president come to power to the White House, he may have a different view about national interests. So we need a clear review of TRA and update to reflecting the current situation of Taiwan. Thank you.
Well, and I think as has been said, but it's worth repeating, the Trump administration has done more with respect to living up to the spirit as well as the letter of the TRA than any president, I think, since it was enacted. The trouble is, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear. If we don't deter China, this will be a horrible loss for the free world in general, not just Taiwan, because it will absolutely, positively confirm China's confidence, Xi Jinping's China dream, that it will secure the dominant position in the world, and it will be harder and harder and harder to stop, to say nothing of the horrific losses that will be entailed, probably, most especially for the people of Taiwan, but quite possibly for a lot of American servicemen and women who might be sent into harm's way to try to prevent that outcome. Gentlemen, we thank you very much for your contribution to this part of the program. I'm very pleased to say, with the precision of a B-1 bomber pilot,
had named the street in front of the Soviet embassy Sakharov Plaza. On exactly the same theory, you think about it actually, that in terms of shining a light, every letter the Soviet communists had to write to their embassy, they had to write Sakharov Plaza if they wanted it to get there. In today's world, on the website, if you want to tell people how to get to the embassy, you got to put the address. So that legislation, when I introduced it, there were a series of times I rose and asked unanimous consent to pass it in the Senate. There was a series of times that Senator Feinstein stood up and objected. And she and I debated vigorously on the Senate floor. Well, one of the things one learns in Washington is there are various levers of influence and power. And so, one of the tools that I had at my disposal that I used is I placed a hold on every State Department nominee. Said, we're done confirming State Department. They invest billions in espionage and theft. The Senate Armed Services Committee, I passed into law legislation giving the Defense Department the ability to veto universities allowing Confucius institutions onto their campuses. Confucius institutions far too often has served as bases for active and aggressive espionage. And we need to understand that China is perfectly willing to invest money. We see it across the globe with the One Belt, One Road initiative, where they're investing billions on expanding their influence. Well, the same is true here in the United States, where they're investing billions in influence campaigns and in espionage and theft. I'll tell you, I've had multiple meetings with a major research institution in Texas that describes how they have on their research staff multiple Chinese nationals who are researchers, who are employees of theirs. But they also happen to be on the payroll
in China's history, which starved untold millions of people to death. Could you address any links that you see between the fight with China and the fight with that same ideology here in the United States?
Sure. My view is that Ronald Reagan defeated communism in Moscow but lost to it at Stanford. Is that simple? I mean, you have an academic left that pervades the whole system. You have reporters who grow out of the academic left who pervade the whole system. You had 3 generations now of teaching people lies. And so you have the natural result. And the only long-term healthy answer to free society is you got to go beat them. You have to turn. I believe there's a chance that next year will resemble 1972 because these people verge on being crazy. And I think the average American's not crazy. They may at times be sort of passive and let people babble for a while, but in the end they have a tendency not to vote for self-immolation.
Rick Fisher.
Rick Fisher with the International Assessment and Strategy Center. Thank you very much for your comments, Mr. Speaker. When the Chinese want to organize for victory, especially long-term victory, Taiwan against the United States, for example, they organize something called a leading group that brings together all the stakeholders across their government, intelligence, military system, and they all talk to each other and they go forward. Is there a lesson in that for the United States? Is it time for us to consider that we're not at all organized for this coming present conflict?
Sure. And I actually had coffee with about a dozen U.S. senators this morning, and that topic came up because neither the House nor the Senate is organized. I mean, if you take the example of Huawei and 5G, it probably covers 7 or 8 different major government agencies. It covers probably 3 or 4 Senate and House committees. So there's no natural center of energy and center of knowledge to organize. And I think very much as we had to get organized in the 30s to stop un-American activities, which people had to forget originally was an anti-Nazi committee, or as we had to get organized in terms of creating the CIA, the Strategic Air Command, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. We're going to go through the same cycle here. I think my only point as a historian is we're in phase 1 where we have to have a big argument. This will be part of the 2020 election. Do you think China's a threat or not? Do you think the United States should in fact decide that it does not want a Chinese internet dominating the planet or not? And you really want to have NATO partners, just as we have Chancellor Merkel selling out to Putin on natural gas. We now have the Italians selling out to Xi Jinping on running ports. At what point do we need to develop a more robust diplomacy and a more robust foreign policy that takes them head on? 1 or 2 more questions.
I think you're getting the cane. If you're willing to take 1 or 2 more, we've got 1 or 2 more to give you. Sasha Gong, also a member of our committee.
I'm a big fan of One Day Movie's history.
Oh, thank you.
Here's what, I wonder if you can talk to the White House. I mean, I came from China and I was a political prisoner there in the 70s. The main difference between the China threat now and the Soviet threat at that time was, at that time, the United States and the free world warned the people in China, in the Eastern Bloc, in Soviet Union, warned their mind and hearts. And I remember so vividly in the 1980s, the United States was an icon. And nowadays, what happens is that you saw China try very hard and quite successful to warn the mind and heart of people in the free world. And just look at schools, how many people thought, how many professors thought China was a better country. So what do you think? What do you think the United States should do?
Well, I think, first of all, Diana West wrote a great book on American betrayal, and if you go back and you look, remember, in the 30s, we had to defeat Nazi sympathizers. In the 40s and 50s, we had to defeat Soviet sympathizers. And Reagan becomes an active anti-communist after Actors Guild meeting when he goes out and has a drink with a friend of his who's a genuine communist, who says, not only am I a Stalinist, but if we take over, we're either going to lock you up or kill you. And Reagan goes home that night and thinks, this guy's really sincere. But that's how these things occur. So we're going to have to go back to another run. I mean, I just remind everybody, if you think these are nice people, look at the Uyghurs. I asked a Chinese leader to explain to me their million-person concentration camps of Uyghurs, and he said, well, think of them better as schools that room and board. They're not really concentration camps. We're trying to help them learn Chinese. Now, a person who can say that with a straight face is a genuinely dangerous person. I am going to have to run. I'm getting yelled at over here. It's quiet yelling, but I can feel it. Let me just say, I think, Frank, what you and your team are doing is vital. I think free societies have to educate themselves, have to think through the response, have to aggressively implement. I am tactically very, very worried, but strategically, having survived Wilhelmine Germany, Imperial Japan, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union, I'm reasonably confident that in the very long run, we will have a greater capacity to respond than will any totalitarian dictatorship, even one with a 5,000-year history. Thank you all very, very much.
Relatives, including my immediate and extended family, who are imprisoned in China's vast systems of prisons, concentration camps, and Bingtuan labor camps. Every time I speak out, the Chinese Communist Party's occupation forces target my family. And I'm sure that they'll be watching today's event live stream and will only continue to target my family more. But that will not silence me. With every family member they arrest, torture, or kill, my resolve to advocate for East Turkestan's independence only solidifies. I will not kowtow and I will not bow. When I was 7 years old, my family was finally able to afford to flee our homeland, and we came to America. We settled in Oklahoma, and here in the land of the free and the home of the brave, we felt welcomed. I joined the United States Army with the hopes of becoming a military officer in order to show my gratitude to the nation that gave my family hope. Unfortunately, my military career was cut short and I was honorably discharged due to a kidney condition. I love America and America is my home. Since I left East Turkestan, China's campaign of terror against the people of East Turkestan has only intensified. This is a war on ethnically Turkic people. This is a war on religion. And most of all, this is a war on the idea, the idea of a free and independent East Turkestan. The oppression of religion is what I want to talk about today. And first off, to be clear of the misconceptions, China's war on religion is not only exclusive to the Uyghurs or other Muslims. In fact, Christians are being profoundly affected too. And so too are Buddhists and practitioners of Falun Gong and even religious adherents of like Judaism, Hinduism, and Taoism. And they too are suffering under this brutal campaign. Today, the United Nations Committee on the Elimination
The Committee on the Present Danger, China, is a critical element of the defense against the greatest threat to free societies everywhere. It is an honor for me to be here today. Thank you so much, Frank. Just about everything is on the line in our trade talks with China. This is where we determine our future, not just this decade, but in subsequent periods. Yes, it is that significant because we have an opportunity to not rescue Chinese communism. We've done that so many times in the past, starting with President Nixon. Actually, Nixon had a good reason to rescue China's communists because that was a low point for us in the Cold War. But we also saved China after the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. We shouldn't have done it then, and we shouldn't do it now. We shouldn't do it now because Xi Jinping, I think the greatest danger to us and to other societies, is at a weak point. He needs a lifeline. He needs a lifeline because his economy is weak. The official National Bureau of Statistics says that China's economy grew 6.6% last year, but that's far too high. A professor at Renmin University in Beijing created a sensation across China in December when he said in 2018, China will grow no more than 1.67%, and it may actually be contracting. And that sounds just about right. Well, we know in March, after 3 months of evident contraction, the Chinese economy picked up a little bit. It picked up a little bit because innovations on and transcend 300 years of Western international relations thinking. You take September 7, 2017, you subtract 300 years, you get to the Treaty of Westphalia, which is the foundation of today's international system of competing sovereign states. So, my question is, what's the point of helping somebody who believes in these things, that China is the world's only ruler? Fifth, China is using the profits of our trade to expand its military, whose officers openly talk about and gleefully talk about killing Americans. Twice in December, senior officers of the People's Liberation Army openly advocated unprovoked attacks on the US Navy in the global commons. In the second of those bellicose statements, on the 20th of that month, a Chinese Rear Admiral said that China should use its DF-21D missiles and its DF-26 missiles to kill 10,000 Americans by sinking 2 aircraft carriers.
Hands on foreign trade. So, your disengagement policy, have you ever thought, how do we deal with that aspect?
One of the most effective things we can do in China without firing a shot is to encourage Chinese people to leave with their money. That's unfortunately not up to us because of the draconian capital controls in China. And we've got a very difficult determination of figuring out who's who. But I think it's important for us to make sure that companies and individuals can take their cash out of China. And there's a number of things that it's very hard for us in terms of that determination, but we can avoid creating obstacles to it. Because the one thing that China's worried about right now is not keeping their currency low, but it's keeping it high in order to convince Chinese to keep their money in the country. There was $1.0 trillion of net capital outflow in 2015, probably about $1.1 trillion in 2016 until the Chinese stopped it. This is a critical vulnerability for them.
Go ahead, just a
Thank you, Robert Delaney from the South China Morning Post. My question is for you, Frank. Just wanted to know specifically, what are the next steps that the committee is going to take in order to realize your main objectives? What specific steps are we going to see? Thank you.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm going to defer that to my colleague Brian Kennedy, who is going to close us with some comments on that, but I'll be happy to talk to you offline afterwards as well. I did want to just say, Sally, and thank you to Kyle as well. Kyle Albin is part of this East Turkestan National Awakening movement. Would you just say a word or two about the coalition that has been recently launched, of which you all are important parts, under the banner of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, to help demonstrate the solidarity of people of various faiths in this country in particular, but increasingly around the world, over what the Chinese Communist Party is doing to wage war against, as you said earlier, all faiths?
Firstly, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. Firstly, I'd like to thank Ambassador Brownback for leading this IRF coalition, for bringing the various interfaith groups, both inside China and its occupied territories, and then all across the world to face the challenge that China is posing to religious freedom, not just in East Turkestan or not just in China, but all across the world, because China is promoting its totalitarian form of governance or with Chinese characteristics, and using its economic and political leverage to in essence eradicate religious freedom all across the world. You can see this happening in Central Asia, where they are trying to silence people who are raising the atrocities that China is doing, like Sergchan Bilash and others. So I want to thank this committee and the Present Danger, the Committee on the Present Danger, and the IRF Roundtable for highlighting religious freedom, because religious freedom is one of the key components that China is targeting. Because China sees itself, the Chinese Communist Party sees itself more than as the overall power, more than God. It doesn't even believe in God, so it wants to eradicate any higher being or concept of any higher being other than itself, which is religion.
President Trump was 8, 10, 12, 14 points down, double digits down on a bunch of battleground states. But I said, don't worry about any of those numbers. Only number that matters is Pat Goodell, the great pollster who just died, just passed away, had been doing work for years. For the first time in American history, in his polling, the American people, particularly the working class and the middle class, believed America was in decline. 70%. And specifically, they believed that our elites not only were comfortable with that, but were comfortable with managed decline. The Trump revolution started with this reaction about managed decline of the American elites, foisted upon a citizenry that for unacceptable outcomes, they didn't want it. Whether it's the southern border, whether it's the manufacturing jobs that left for China, whether it's these kind of pointless foreign wars we've been in, on and on and on. Those are the three pillars. What President Trump really turned around and focused on, and compared Hillary Clinton as kind of the guardian of this kind of globalist elite. Remember, after we went in that big shock, Prime Minister Abe, breaking all kind of tradition and custom, left a conference, I think the following week, and came up to talk to the then president-elect. And his warning was about China. The entire transition with Mike Flynn and others, it was to look at how we start to pivot, not this kind of marketing ploy that the Obama administration had, this pivot to Asia, but really pivot for the great geopolitical struggle of the 21st century. That's between two very different systems. And this is what I think is Speaker Gingrich said about the infantile nature of the mainstream media, that have not defined this. But I tell you who did define it. If you go back to the third week of January in 2017, there are two speeches given. One is in Davos, my favorite place, right? The other's in Washington, D.C., a couple of blocks from here. One, President Xi goes to Davos and gives a speech on globalization. And he is lauded as the savior of the globalization project. It's on The Economist, the Financial Times of London, that here's a man that speaks with wisdom. Here's a man that speaks with understanding. Here's a very sophisticated voice. And a couple of days later, President Trump, the media calls it the American Carnage speech, but really, what it really was, he said, now comes the hour of action. Right? Now comes the hour of action. We will, I think the quote is, we will form new alliances and rejuvenate old ones, and unite the civilized world to eradicate radical Islamic terrorism from the face of the earth. And then to pivot simultaneously in this great geopolitical struggle. What Xi, and you gotta remember, when he's at Davos, and they're all sitting there, all the McKinsey guys, all the Booz Allen guys, all the law firms, all the accounting firms, Goldman Sachs, my old firm, all the commercial banks, all of them. They went to the best schools in the world. They worked at the smartest place in the world. They got total information at their fingertips. You're telling me they don't know about the Uyghurs? They don't know about the underground Christian church. They don't know about the underground Catholic church. They don't know about the Dalai Lama. They don't know about the social credit score. They do not know about the enslavement of the Chinese people. Sure they know. And they don't care. The Committee on 100, you know, this highfalutin group of the best, you know, they have their, I think, black tie dinner on Saturday night. They put out a press release on Sunday, right? This is some of the elites of the American financial and corporate community. And guess what the problem is? You know what the problem is? You're racist, right? This is about racial profiling. Tell that to the Chinese people that are enslaved. Tell that to the freedom fighters here from China. Lian Chanhan, Sasha Gong, all the great patriots that have fought for their fellow man in China. This is a scam. You know, Allison, Graham, he and Kissinger got this, you know, the Thucydides trap. This is the new thing, right? Thucydides trap. It's the same scam they ran back in the 70s, right? It's the reason the Committee on Present Danger existed. It's the reason Andy Marshall, when I sat down with Frank Gaffney and I talked to the great Andy Marshall, one of the architects of the victory that we had in the Cold War. Same scam. You know, Soviet Union's the rising power, we're the declining power, we gotta, you know, I took the Naval War College, just first thing, Peloponnesian War. Gotta understand it, gotta study Peloponnesian War. Because we're a declining power, they're the rising power. Gotta have SALT, gotta have détente, gotta have rapprochement, gotta have it all. Right? Complete and total scam by the same guys, the same universities, the same elite, the same people that mock and ridicule Donald Trump every day and mock and ridicule the people in the red MAGA hats every day. The same people that brought us victory in the Cold War. What did Andy Marshall and Bill Casey say? I think there's something wrong here. I don't think the Soviet economies, I don't think they're that big. They did the analysis. This wasn't a 5% miss, it wasn't a 10% miss. The economy was half the size we had been projecting for decades. That's what the Reagan defense plan was. Frank knows this. It's an economic war. We can never build a 600-ship Navy. I was a naval officer. I was a junior officer back as I came off sea duty in the South China Sea to be a junior officer in the Pentagon for the Chief of Naval Operations. See the war plan. It was an economic plan to bury them. That's what Star Wars was. Right? You think you match the conventional weapons? We'll see you one. Right? And of course the CIA then projected it's going to take us 50 years to destroy them. It took us 8. 8. Because a very simple man with simple convictions in California said, hey, these guys are smaller than California, just like the Russians today are smaller than New York State, but this city is obsessed with them, right? They don't look at the greatest existential threat we've ever had. You can't see that. Reagan saw it. What did he tell Dick Allen? When Dick Allen, you know, when Dick Allen said, "Don't say geopolitical, don't be Brzezinski, don't be thing," just he says, he says geopolitical and shuts up and says, "Mr. President, what are your thoughts?" How about this, Dick? We win, they lose, right? Let's go back to that speech. Donald Trump is looked at as a barbarian. What Donald Trump is reinforcing is the Westphalian system. This is a radical, these are two systems that are incompatible. One side is going to win and one side is going to lose. President Xi, this is not the Chinese people. The Chinese people are one of the most noble people that have ever walked the earth. They've been oppressed and abused for millennia. And now under a new emperor, this radical, and it's a radical cadre of the CCP, with Xi and Wang Xishan and all of them, out to suppress the Chinese people and to have a, as they say in the thought of Chairman Xi, which is now, you know, the same level of Deng and Mao, the most, you know, most important thinking international affairs in 300 years. I think that's the Treaty of Westphalia. We believe, we're nationalists, and we believe in the nation state. And we believe in the nation state as on the shoulders of a free citizenry. That those nations will work it out. But the Xi's plan is very different. And this is why the party at Davos is cheering him. It's a network effect. That's what One Belt, One Road, made in China 2025 and 5G. That's the surface. That's what they're doing. Look, the underlying thing is they've taken the three great geopolitical strategies of the 20th century. Mackinder's, control the Eurasian landmass, number one. Mahan controlled all the naval choke points like the British and the Americans, number two. And Speakman, control the rim of Asia and force your enemy off. No country, Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Hitler, Charles, take it, all of them. Nobody's ever tried to do all three at one time. That's what the Chinese are doing. One Belt, One Road is just to connect the Eurasian landmass and sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. And I just came back from 5 weeks on the road. Japan, Michigan and Ohio for rallies. Brazil, we're having meeting President Bolsonaro here, and then Italy. You know what the number one conversation topic at all these places is? China. People forget Bolsonaro, the third leg of his stool was at not just law and order and traditional society. His third leg of his stool is, I don't mind China buying into Brazil, they're not going to buy Brazil. When I'm in Italy, it's just not the $30 billion of memorandums of understanding that they announced, right, with one side of the Italian government, or the $60 billion they announced in France. It's the secret deal that they talk about with the Vatican, right? That we've now given, in a crisis in the church where you can't have any lady say anything about selection of bishops, we've turned over to the most atheistic, radical regime about religion to pick bishops in the Catholic Church. So now they can, concentration camps for the Uyghur. They just announced they don't, you can't, the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama has got to get their sign off, right? Got to be their guy, got to be approved. Underground Catholic Church thrown on the bus by, besides the Dalai Lama, the second most holy man in all of Asia, Cardinal Zen, who says, this is, you are throwing living saints under the bus. The network effect. And that's what made in China 2025. It's advanced chip design, artificial intelligence, robotics, the merger of that with One Belt, One Road, and 5G. And 5G is not just about downloading movies quicker. It is 10 orders of magnitude different. It is the Internet of Things. And most importantly, and this is what Huawei knows. Remember, Huawei's not associated with the PLA. Huawei's not some partner of the PLA. Huawei is the People's Liberation Army. To show you how bad this situation is, when Canada, the nicest folks in the world, when they hold her so that we can extradite her, that tells you how far it's gone. 5G turns data into plutonium that can be weaponized. And they intend to. The most depressing thing about Speaker Gingrich, who's one of the wisest men I know, was to say that we're pre the Kennan memo. If that's the case, we're in very bad shape. The purpose for the colleagues at the South China Morning Post, one of the great papers in the world, one of the single purposes, besides doing research and papers, we have to get out into this country and we have to get internationally. The quality of people in this room that can speak truth to the American people, speak truth to the people in the world. Remember, free people in the world don't want to be under the totalitarian regime of the radical cadre that runs the Chinese Communist Party. If you look at what the Chinese people can achieve, at the age of 21, when I pulled into Hong Kong, look at Hong Kong. When you have the rule of law, when you have freedom of speech and freedom of religion, there's nothing the Chinese people cannot accomplish. And when you look at what the Chinese have accomplished here in the United States of America, there's nothing the Chinese people cannot accomplish. President Trump needs your backing. We're engaged in this like we've never been engaged before on every level. From sending battle groups into the South China Sea to contest it through the Straits of Formosa. Tomorrow's the 40th anniversary of our alignment with Taiwan. The call of the president, of whom we took when I was chief strategist. This is the defining event of our time. And 100 years from now, this is what they're going to remember us for. And what I will guarantee you, we're going to identify those members of the elite that sold us out and continue to sell out the American people and sell out the Chinese people. I'm honored to be part of this and honored to speak to you today. Thank you.
Okay, we literally have to clear the room before 3, so we're going to turn this over to